Hey guys, welcome to week 3 for the Intro to 3D tutorial series. My name's Jason. So this week we're going to look into a bit of lighting, and we're first going to take a look at one of the most commonly used lighting setups, the 3-point lighting setup. And I think it'd be a good idea before we get started with the project to just go through what that is and how we can set it up in our scene and what its purpose is in real life with photography and film. So let's have a look at that now. So here's just a quick diagram of what a standard 3-point lighting setup may look like in your scene. So this is a concept that's been adapted from film and photography, and that's made its way into 3D animation. So we first start with our key light. Now imagine in a completely dark room, the key light will be the primary source or key light source of light, to illuminate the subject. And we usually place this key light somewhere between 15 and 45 degrees of the character or the subject. We have the fill light. Now the fill light, its purpose is to basically fill out the darker areas on the opposite side of your subject, and it will soften the lights emitted from the key light. So what this means is it will just pick up any lighting or dark areas, or tones, and it will just evenly light out the other side of your object. Now the backlight, or commonly sometimes referred to as the rim light, its purpose is to not really add any light like the key or fill, but more so to separate your subject from the background and add definition by creating a recognizable outline. And we want to do this just because if we're filming or we're shooting on a completely black screen, or maybe the subject will contrast into the background, we want a way of being able to separate those two. Okay, so it's worth mentioning that you should all go check out this book, Digital Lighting and Rendering, the second edition by Jeremy Byrne. Now, this is an amazing book that goes through a lot of these techniques that we'll be using today, and it's available in any JMC library through campuses. So as mentioned before, the 3-point lighting setup has been adapted from photography and film. So we can see in this particular picture here, we have the key light, which is the brightest light in the scene, lighting the character and casting most of the rays onto the character, with the fill light, and that softens out and balances the lighting on the opposite side. And then we have the backlight determining the rim of the character and being able to separate her from the background. And again, it's important to know where all these concepts come from and how we can best use them in our scenes. Okay, so just a breakdown. Key light will in a completely dark room, be the light source for your subject. It's usually placed between 15 and 45 degrees, and it is the main or key or primary light source in the scene. The fill will balance out the darker areas on the opposite side of your subject and soften light that is emitted from the key light, and the backlight will tie it all together, creating a rim so it can separate the subject from its background. So starting in a brand new scene on Maya, let's go ahead and set our project. And I just want you to get into nature of setting projects in Maya just so it's easy to work with, and we're working in a pipeline structure. So we can come down to File and Set Project. We want to find lighting scene, and you can find this with the link below in the Play-Doh, or you can find this on the lecture share at JMC. So we'll just use set, and I'm just going to then open the scene, and we want to open the one that says tomato scene underscore dot start dot ma, and we'll just use that one. We'll open it up, and I'm just going to go don't save. Okay, so this is our scene. Now the inspiration that we'll be using today, if you have a look on this tomato that we have found on the net, and we want to kind of follow this type of thing. So again, it's unknown whether or not this was rendered out before, but we're going to be using this as our reference, and it's important to use references as much as possible, especially during the process of replicating things that are real. And we're going to be in particular paying attention to things like the colors, the level of specular, the level of reflections, and also just the discoloration on the surface of this particular shape. So we want to be using real life references as well. So if I was just to come out to my scenes, I can just show you some of the references that I have. So we have a tomato on its own, and you can kind of see in this particular reference here that we have some specularity on the surface. It looks very smooth because of this. And then we have the stem, looks very kind of prickly, has a bit of specularity coming off the hairiness of it. And we've got a few bumps and dents and stuff, and as I said, this will have to be modeled in, or we'll use a map. But at the same time, we want to kind of go for a nice color and even distribution of lighting. Alright, now that we're set up, let's get started in our scene by setting up our first light. Now, what I would like to do is come up to Create, Light, and my first light will be a spotlight. So typically a key light setup usually features a spotlight. So the first thing that we're going to do is, if I was going to my wireframe by clicking this little button here, you can see that it's going to place the light out into the origin. Okay. Now another thing to note as well is if we were to open up our attribute editor, and the first thing that I would like to do is just change the transform to key for key light. And another thing that we can do, because we have a really small light in our scene at the moment, we would like to scale this up, but instead of actually using the scale tool, like so, this will actually scale the entire light, and we only really just want to scale the shape of the light. So if we were to come over to where we have our object display, we have what's called a located size here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my control and left click drag, and then I can kind of bring this up, say right about there. Let's just make it 10, should be a good size. Now I want to have this pointing directly at my tomato, so I'm just going to bring this up and try to point towards my tomato. Now a good shortcut key to note for lining up this tomato is if we hit the T key, you can see what will happen is a little transform will appear, and now this is like a little aim look at control. So we can get this perfectly set up, and I'm just going to go into my hotbox controls just by holding my space bar, and I can go into my foreview, and I'm going to look for my top view. So a good way of doing this is if we hold our space bar and left click down, we can go into the top view, and now I'm in the top view. I can kind of position where the pip is, where my light will be. So I can always jump back out of this by holding my space bar, clicking down on the Maya symbol and going to perspective view. And I'm just going to see what we have so far. Now, as we've said before, that Arnold uses quadratic lighting, so let's set up our quadratic lighting. So on the shape, key shape, and now notice because we've named it key, it's called a key shape, we're going to up this intensity. I'm going to use a fairly high number here, so maybe 5,000. As you can see, our tomato starts to appear, and we want to set the K to quadratic. Another thing we can also do is bring up in the Arnold tab just a bit of the exposure, just so we can see where our tomato is. There we go. So Arnold is a physical based renderer, meaning that it uses physical based materials for lighting. and in turn all of its lighting obeys the square inverse law on how energy dissipates over an area. And basically what that means, here we have a simple scene with a torch, and just to explain this a little bit better, I'm going to pull the torch towards the wall. Now notice, in real life, if we were to do this with a torch, the light would slowly get brighter and brighter. But notice when we do that, it does not. And this is because we are using a decay rate of no decay, which just means if I was to pull this away as far away as I could, and we'll change the cone angle just so you can see this is fairly obvious. No matter how far away that light source is, it will not decay and it will not get brighter. So what we need to do instead, if I was just to bring this back, is we can come in and change the decay rate to quadratic lighting. This means we're following the square inverse law. So if we use quadratic lighting, notice it's going to disappear. This is because we need to increase a lot more energy. So I'm going to put this up to something like 1,000. We might even need to go just a little bit further, maybe just one more zero. And as you can see, when we do that, the light will appear. But notice now, if I pull closer towards the wall, it gets brighter. And the further I pull it away, the light slowly dissipates. This is because quadratic lighting means it will dissipate over the distance of where the decay is. Now notice this material is not going to act very appropriately, so we might need to switch this to a Maya Arnold, and like from a Maya setup to an Arnold render setup. So let's just hit stop on our IPR, and then another shortcut is if we hit space key, we can enable the IPR. Just going to click this back. So clicking this will show all our different channels. So I'm just going to stop that and close that. So I'm going to come into my tomato, and I would like to change this to be more like a tomato. So I'm going to set my first of all, let's set this from a blend to an AI standard. So we'll use an AI standard when we would like to use Arnold rendering. So you'll see by default on our blend we had set up a remap ramp, and this has just come along for the ride. So what I would like to do is now just put a couple of values here. So first of all, if I was to render this through, you can see it's a completely matte surface. So I'm just going to up the intensity of the weight to start off with. So what I might do is just set the weight to be something like, I'm just going to play around until it looks about right. So this specular of the tomato's weight, I'm going to set that to be about let's just try 0.5. So I'm just going to play this through, and we might need to just reload it. So 0.58 maybe, and we can update this view if it gets stuck. And I'm just going to put the roughness up just a little bit as well. Let's just have a look, see what we have. So it starts to look a little bit nicer. As you can see, we've got a bit of specularity there, and that will play a little bit nicer with the shader that we're using. Another thing that I'd like to do is take care of that kind of skin look, so we can come to our subsurface scattering, and I'm going to set this to a color, say maybe like an orange, and I'm also going to set the weight just so we can see it to 1. We can even go a bit higher than this, so say maybe even 2. Cool. And the next thing that I might want to do as well is set the stem to be
the appropriate AI standard. So we can set this to be a green. I'm going to apply a bit of roughness to this, meaning that on it will appear like a rough surface. And let's just play that through and see what we get. So it's a little bit too dark now. I'm going to, first of all, let's just kind of zoom in and just see what we have here. So what I can do is introduce a bit of backlighting, and what backlighting does, if I was to zoom out on this guy, is it will kind of lift up some of that light, so it's a little bit easier to see. You can't see it yet because we don't have any light in there, but it should shine through a bit more like paper. Cool. With those settings, let's go ahead and apply our second light, the standard My Directional light, point light, spotlight, and quad light. Unfortunately, the ambient light and the volume light will not work in these particular setups, but we can use the others. I'm just going to use a standard area light, and this is going to be my second light, and this one I'll just move back. Again, we don't want to scale the entire light, we want to just scale its shape, so we can always set the locator shape to be, say, something like 10 like we did before. I'm going to move this over, and using the transform by hitting the T key, we can just move that over into around about where the center is, and we can then lift it up, and that should look quite good. So something like that. Again, we need to give this a quadratic fall off, and we're going to set this a little bit higher, or sorry, a little bit lower. Let's set that to about 2000, and we can raise that level up if we really want to. So I'm just going to zoom in on this, hit the little play button. That should get the render going. And we might actually bring in a bit of the Arnold tab here. And a good little trick is if we just use the exposure tab and just bring that up, we can light up the other side, and that starts to look pretty nice. So if it kind of stops working like this, we can always update our scene by clicking this little button here. Or if that doesn't work, we can even just bring it back up. And that starts to look a little bit nicer. Now, what I would like to do as well is just copy this out. I'm just going to bring up my outliner by going to Windows Outliner. And when we bring that up, we can see all the things in our scene. So at the moment we have a key light. This one will be called our fill light. And then the last one, if I copy this by going Control D, we can then basically call this guy backlight, and we'll move him around about where the back of the subject is, so around about here maybe. Just move that in, and we'll just give that a shot and just see what we have. So that starts to look pretty nice. So let's just zoom in a little bit on that. We'll press play on that. And as you can see, it's struggling to kind of keep up a little bit. One thing that we can do to make this run just a little bit quicker is we can always come to our settings, and when we open up our settings, we want to come over to our systems tab, and this is bucket size is 64. Let's just lower it to 32, and that will hopefully make the computer kind of calculate the bucket render, which is just the little patches on the screen. So if we just reload that guy, you should see it's running just a little bit quicker now. Now those little dots are anti-aliasing, and we can take care of those later on. If I wanted to say just do one section of the render, we could always just take a render of maybe just that section. Then whatever I do in terms of adjustments, say I was going to bring up the weight of this, that will only affect just that region there. So a good little technique for just focusing on one section at a time. Cool, so the light that I have at the moment, I don't need it to be the full intensity. I might just take this down to say 1. Well, maybe just about 500 less, so maybe something like that, 1500. And we can always play with the Arnold, and I might just turn on the color, and you should see what we get. It's just a little bit of a highlight and not too much. We can always move around these lights just to see what they do. I just want a bit of a rim light on this guy, so something like that, and that starts to look a little bit nicer. Cool. And another thing that we can also do is set our ground plane to be a AI standard as well, and we might just introduce a bit of weight into that guy, and also some reflection, just so we can see the reflectivity from the render. Now, one other thing that we would like to set up in this particular scene is the ability to have a single camera. At the moment I'm just using my perspective camera, which is not very good, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to set my camera up. So let's just create one. Let's go create. Underneath lights we've got a camera. I'm just going to use the camera, and I'm going to pull that guy back again because I don't want to scale the actual attribute of the camera. We can always come over to the object display and set that to be a little bit bigger, say like 10, and then I'm just going to jump inside that camera and kind of just position it. We can turn on our film gate, which is just this one here, and we can kind of get it set up for a nice render, so maybe something like that would look good. Let's take a look at that. We want to set our drop down to camera shape this time. Just going to zoom out a little bit on this guy. There we go. Now this floor is just a bit too easy to see, so we can always turn down the weight on the specularity of that guy. Maybe even take down the roughness a bit, bring down the reflections, and I'm just going to take down the roughness just so something like that. And I might just jump inside this camera again and just quickly dolly in just a little bit, and I'm just going to stop this just so we can do this a little bit quicker. Hold my Alt key and come in a little bit more, something like that. Let's play that through, see what we have. Nice. So we're starting to get something that looks quite good. Now I'm just going to take a quick render of this guy, so I'll pause the video. Alright, so this is my first render, and as you can see it took only a minute, but you can kind of see this starting to look very nice. I can see a few things that stick out a bit like a sore thumb. You can kind of see that the shadow is just a little bit too crisp, and we can take care of that. And we also have these little dots around the place, which just basically is anti-aliasing, so we can fix that with the render settings later on. So let's just minimize this and go back and see what we have. I'm going to restart my Arnold renderer just to see what we have. I'm just going to hit stop on that guy. Now with these shadows, these are being directly controlled by the lights, and what I'm going to do also, so I don't move my camera, I'm going to use this little lock camera, which is new to my 2017, so we can click that, and now we don't go in and out of our camera. I'm just going to use my panels and go back to my perspective just for now, Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name my camera, so we can come over to its transform shape on the channel box, or maybe just bring up our outliner. So our outliner controls all the little different things in our scene. So I'm just going to select this guy and call him main cam, like we did for our orange. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm eventually going to put depth of field on this just to help solve the illusion. But another thing that I can do is we can also just turn on, well, we need to first of all take care of the shadows, because we can see the last time that our tomato has these really kind of defined shadows, so we'll take care of that. And working on the key shape just for now, coming down to the Arnold section we have underneath the radius tab, we can just put that, max that all the way out, maybe to about 10, and let's just see what we get. So making sure that we're in the main camera area, and press play on that guy. And again, sometimes it's a bit temperamental, but you can kind of see, if I was to zoom in on this, got a few more of those shadows from the key light that just look a little bit softer. We can come over to the fill shape, and I'm going to come over and just set the samples, density, exposure. Let's see what we have here. We've got a spread attribute. Let's just set the samples up just a little bit higher, and we'll do the same on this camera here as well. And we'll just give that a test. So I'm just going to pause the video. Okay, so I've just taken this render, and what I've done as well is I've brought down on the ground, I've just brought down the reflection and the reflection color, just so it's a little bit more less reflective, it looks a little bit more realistic. One other thing that I might do as well is maybe just this area here, I'll just render that. I'm going to bring up just the color just a tiny bit, about up to there, and I'm just going to render that out. You should see we have now like a little border, just to help sell the realism of this shot. Okay, you'll notice as well, if I was to render this through, you can kind of see we have some dots, and this is just render settings will take care of this. So we can see that there is, to the most part, is working really well. We're just going to go through, and I'm just going to use a couple of these settings. My camera AA, which is the overall samples basically. First of all, I'm just going to apply a little bit more on my diffuse. I'm going to set my glossy to about 3 samples as well. I'm going to set my refraction to about the same, the SSS for about 3, and I'm going to set the camera AA just a little bit higher to about 5, and I'm just going to do a render. Okay, so this is my final render. So I'm quite happy with this. So again, once we're happy with our renders, we want to save them out. So just make sure that when we come into File and Save Image, that we make sure on the other side of the options that Color Manage is enabled. So just this little checkbox here. I want to create a tomato final TIFF. So we just want to look for TIFF, create a TIFF. And I'm also going to create another one so it's viewable, and I'm going to make this one a JPEG. So we'll come in and we'll create that one as well. So there we go. And in the next tutorial, we're going to go on to doing a bit of modeling. We're going to start with spline modeling, and I look forward to seeing you then. So if you have any questions, just contact me. If not, thanks for your time, and hope you learned something.